Hello, everyone, and welcome to our presentation, Achieving Justice, the Prosecutor's Role. Today's webinar is hosted by AEquitas. My name is Cynthia Hatchell. I'm the project coordinator for AEquitas, and I will be introducing today's webinar. If you have a question during the presentation, please enter it in the chat box. We will answer questions at the end of the webinar with time permitting. You are also welcome to contact us directly at any time following today's presentation, and we will send you contact information during our follow-up. AEquitas's mission is to improve the quality of justice in sexual violence, intimate partner violence, stalking, and human trafficking cases by developing, evaluating, and refining prosecution practices that increase victim safety and offender accountability. As a national training and technical assistance provider, AEquitas develops resources, conducts trainings, and offers 24/7 consultations for prosecutors and allied professionals. For more information on AEquitas, please visit our website at equitasresource.org. You can also follow AEquitas on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. The link to each is available on our website. Today's presentation is the inaugural webinar for the Just Exits Initiative, supported by the Novo Foundation. The Just Exits Initiative is transforming justice by closing on-ramps to and building off-ramps from exploitation, by educating prosecutors and law enforcement about the realities of sexual exploitation and trafficking, supporting efforts to improve our responses to exploited women and girls, including making sure that they are not unjustly criminalized, and collaborating to improve survivors' access to appropriate services, and making sure that our work is something that can be measured and replicated. This presentation includes the creative work of others. This property is being used by permission or under claim of the Fair Use 17 USC 107. This presentation was created pursuant to fair use guidelines, and further use or distribution is prohibited. Today's presenters are Jane Anderson, an attorney advisor at AEquitas, Joy Friedman, an advocate and president of Joy Friedman Consulting and survivor advocate, and Jeri Moomaw, founder and director of Innovation's Human Trafficking Collaborative, and a survivor advocate. I'll now turn it over to our presenters.
Thanks so much, Cynthia. And thank you all for being with us today. I'm really overwhelmed with the response we've had from this webinar series. This is the third of 3. We encourage you to check out the first 2 as well. I'll be helping moderate the webinar today. My name's Jane Anderson. I am an attorney advisor with AEquitas. And before joining AEquitas, I was a prosecutor in Miami-Dade, Florida. Started my career doing some domestic violence work, worked through the office, doing a lot of, spending a lot of attention with sexual assault cases, homicides, really anything under the sun in Miami. And I returned to supervise our domestic violence unit. It was at that point when I started doing some human trafficking work. And from that initial work, I ended up being a founding member of our task force and eventually our standalone human trafficking unit. And I was privileged to try many of Florida's first state level human trafficking cases. And along the way, it was a very steep learning curve. And I have to say it was through survivors, working with survivor advocates and victim service providers that I really learned so much about this. And so it's really a pleasure to be presenting today along with 2 amazing survivor advocates who have lived and professional experience that they'll be sharing with us today. So Joy, if you don't mind introducing yourself a little bit.
Yes, thank you, Jane. Welcome, and I am honored to be here to speak and help educate on this issue. My name is Joy Friedman. I am a survivor of sexual exploitation, domestic violence, recidivism, and a number of other issues and traumas that have happened in my life. I have worked at a couple nonprofits for over the last 20 years, working with survivors like myself And now I've reached out and decided to do consulting, training, and education in the community. And I have been called to testify at trafficking hearings as an expert witness. Through the years of coming out of 22 years of sexual exploitation, I've found that the healing process is lifelong. So therefore, trying to help educate people is what my goal is here today, as well as in the past. Working with survivors is very, very challenging in so many ways, but I need everybody to understand that there's hope. And that's what this is all about, is helping see the solution to an issue, that the victim is not the criminal. Miss Jeri.
You're muted, Jeri.
You know, you're muted, Jeri, is the most used term that I have heard all of 2020. So, you know, why break the record? My name is Jeri Moomaw, and I am the founder and executive director of Innovation's Human Trafficking Collaborative. I'm based in the Pacific Northwest. I am in the Olympia, Washington area. I am a survivor of child sexual exploitation. I was trafficked from 13 till 19. And then at 19, I was basically patted on the back and said, hey, you're free from your trafficker, go on and have a great life. And I wasn't constitutionally able to. And so I ended up being involved in the commercial sexual industry all the way up until my early 30s. And I'm aging myself, but the past 20 years, on April 11th, I celebrated 20 years clean from opiates and 20 years out of all exploitation. And during that time period, I have started from a grassroots level. I basically started my organization because there wasn't anybody there for me when I was 19. And like Joy said, I mean, we need to get that truth and that knowledge out there, but I'm also very system focused. So we can get education and awareness out there, but if we don't have developed systems, then we are really not serving victims properly. So over the past 20 years, I have worked as a consultant for numerous government agencies, created curriculum and webinars, and just really trying to elevate not only my voice as a survivor, but within our organization, we are all Indigenous led and we're all survivor led, because I want to build an army to be able to take on this work in the next generation. So that's me. I'm super excited to be here. I will try to not have you say, Jeri, you're muted multiple times. So.
Well worth it, Jeri. Well worth it to have you guys here with us. I know everyone will appreciate your expertise as we've moved forward here, when we're really trying to figure out how do we achieve justice and what does that look like for survivors who are intersecting with the criminal justice system. And then how do we increase those off-ramps, right? And really meaningful off-ramps. And the key to that is really providing those appropriate services. We'll do a little deep dive into what that means when we use that terminology. And then we'll spend quite a bit of time talking about criminal record relief and how we can figure out what it looks like where we are, how we can expand on that, and how we can make it really accessible to victims of human trafficking and exploitation. So I want to start it off, get you guys chatting, hopefully in the chat box. We want to know from you what your perspective is. What is justice? What does that look like to you? So let's see if we can get some chat going on here. And if you have any issues with that, you should make sure it's going to panelists and attendees. And I don't know if Joy and Jeri, maybe Joy, you can start off. You know, how would you answer this question as we get people sort of, you know, their minds going in this direction to start us off today?
I would look at it from a couple of standpoints. I would look at it on a personal level because our work makes us look through that lens. And when you go home, if this was a flipped thing and it was someone from your family going through whatever justice issue that was going on, we'd be viewing it differently. At least I would. So therefore, I ask people to think about it from a personal level as well as a professional level, looking through the lens of what does justice look like to you?
Mhm. Jeri, I see this word equity. Can you go maybe tell us a little bit more about that? Well, you're muted, of course.
I'm leaving it on, okay?
There you go.
I'm leaving it on. You know, I think when we really look at, you know, what is justice? You know, it is really, it's about equity. And it is about holding people that are harming other people accountable, and also supporting the 19-year-old, you know, Jeri that didn't have anybody there. And justice, you know, can look so many different ways, but it has to be looking at it from a trauma-informed lens, and really understanding, you know, the extent of crime. And you know, that can be on the whole family. And I love what Vanita Carter put up here, you know, freedom. You know, justice can look so many different ways. And I'm really, really honored to be able to kind of unpack that a little bit more as we go.
Mm-hmm. I love the chat start coming in with reparation of harm, that holding the victim, holding the offender accountable,
Mm-hmm.
and providing this freedom or access to justice to the victim as well. So we kind of have these two parts happening that a lot of you guys are identifying. So how do we achieve that justice? And for me, coming from that, you know, criminal justice background, sometimes that's a little tunnel vision that we get,
Mhm.
right? Justice is, you know, arrest, conviction, right? And that's a very offender focused lens, which I want to be doing an offender focused lens when we talk about, you know, harm caused, and when we're putting together our trial. But by doing that, we sort of miss this whole other piece, right?
Mhm.
So anybody have some thoughts on how we can do a better job of actually achieving what you guys are talking about? So that's what I want us all to be thinking. Spoiler alert, I'm going to ask this question at the end of the webinar as well. So as we go through this, I'd like everyone to be kind of thinking about, okay, we have these big ideas, how do we get there? And from the prosecutor's point of view, one of the sort of foundational things I want everyone to remember is that we are different than a regular attorney. This is a famous quote from a Supreme Court case, Berger v. US, where it actually says to us as prosecutors that our interest is not only in securing a conviction, but that justice shall be done. And we do that in lots of traditional ways. We're making charging decisions, right? And that can affect our victims greatly. And so if you haven't already seen our second webinar on assessing culpability, that's really what we're talking about, is making those charging decisions, you know, reviewing the evidence, offering pleas, and then eventually prosecuting cases and monitoring offenders. That's kind of the traditional role. But I know, Jeri, you and your work, and a lot of you guys out there are probably doing some other things, you know, to non-traditional things about how to achieve justice. And some of those are, you know, making sure our victim is filing for restitution, or victims' compensation, connecting them with services. How does that look in the work that you're doing, Jeri?
You know, honestly, we really look at everything through a strength-based lens and a survivor-focused lens. And, you know, so one of the things that we really need to talk about is, you know, yeah, there's a criminal justice lens, and there's a public health lens. And when we're talking about a public health lens, we're talking about, plugging the on-ramps earlier on. And also an area that doesn't get looked at a lot, and I know we're going to talk about this, is re-exploitation of somebody that has been exploited before, with polyvictimization. And so some of the work that we do, I'm Native American, I'm Shoshone Bannock. I live on Nisqually territory here in Washington State, and have been blessed with opportunities to work with not only tribal partners, but our organization is located within the Thurston County Family Justice Center. So pre-COVID, we had, law enforcement, behavioral health. We still have social services, really the community-based organization and legal. And really, our goal is, for IHTC, my organization, to be the touch point for supporting survivors, because it's different. But it is a community issue, and it is a community solution. And so we really have to come at it from breaking down silos and having this multidisciplinary approach. And that includes legal, huge part of it.
Yeah, and that's kind of our focus today, but I don't want to lose sight of all these other folks that are in that multidisciplinary approach, because there are partners all along the way, no matter where we're sort of coming from. So in all of that, we're going to spend the next couple of slides talking about the prosecutor's role and how we can do that by minimizing on-ramps and maximizing off-ramps. And this is, when we were preparing for this webinar, this was one of the big pieces that came out of it, is trying to figure out those intervention points early. Those early intervention points, right? So where are those intervention points, do you guys think?
Joy, you want to take a hit at it first, and then I will?
Sure. I know one thing for me is when I was in the middle of doing one of the cases that had been brought against me, working with the pre-investigators, the arresting officers, and the prosecuting attorney, one knew about sexual exploitation and had a pretty good grip on it. One didn't know anything at all about it. And one had an attitude as if they didn't even care. I mean, they were, as far as they was concerned, I could have gone ahead and been locked up, and that would have done society some good. So when I think about that, it's like an education piece across the board to help individuals understand from every level what exploitation is and why it's so important that we ask the right questions when we're interviewing at any level of a case.
I like that. And I think, we're getting to a point where a lot of folks are putting together the pieces about, prostitution arrest and exploitation. But, the more we look at it, it's not just people coming in with prostitution arrests. So we need to start getting that a bigger, sort of wider net to ask those questions.
And I couldn't agree more. I mean, when I look at not only my numerous interactions with the Criminal Justice Center or, services, I look at some of my current and past clients, and there's so many intervention points. What people need to be doing is really understanding what red flags and indicators are. And if you recognize red flags and indicators, then, really work on having a uniform screening that's not, like a piece of paper. But for me, I know, I was being sentenced. A pre-sentence investigator came and spoke with me. I had talked about, being under, abusive boyfriend control and so forth, and nothing happened. Nothing happened. And you know why? That's why I've like dedicated, my work to really taking those blinders off and to be able to look at that. And there's been so much progress that has been made. Like we get referrals from, the Narcotic and Human Trafficking Task Force in our area, Department of Homeland Security investigators, and they're actually writing afterwards, like point by point, how they did this interview and asking if it was trauma informed. And they got a little pot of money and was able to make this beautiful room that used to be really sterile to be able to talk with victims. People are listening. They really are. And so that's why it's so important at every point of intervention that you're looking for red flags and indicators.
So exactly, because now we're looking at this, all these intervention points, then who needs that training, right? We can't just train the people that are in the specialized unit and keep it like a silo. So I put out a couple of examples of thoughts of where those intervention points may occur in your office or in your jurisdiction, right? And the way I started it was thinking about who makes decisions and recommendations. And it's not just one unit, because people are coming to the criminal justice system in lots of different ways. So kind of went through this from different scenarios. So a child picked up for truancy and drug possession. There's a probation officer in the juvenile unit who's tasked with recommending some course of action for that child. That person needs to know, hey, these are two big red flags, right? So let's not just be worried about the drug possession. Let's look at what it means that there's also this truancy piece of it. And I know, Jeri, you wanted to talk a little bit about the second scenario, which was, we've got a young woman arrested for prostitution for the second time. There's no like automatic referral to diversion now, because now we're looking at a second time offender. So we need some special permission, right? And so we've got maybe a low-level supervisor, and we've got the court that needs to say, okay, I'm going to take somebody for a second time.
And the thing about it is, this exploitation and, forcing somebody into, prostitution or say, traffickers are vicious. I mean, they will say, no, you're on punishment. You have to go out raw. And so they're sending them with no condoms. And so as a punishment, and I've had twice in the last 18 months referrals from young women that were stealing condoms. And, so kind of broadening that net and looking at that. And, it doesn't happen in a silo. If they are arrested for the first time, first, I don't want them to be arrested. I want, pre-arrest intervention with survivor-led diversion and court programs, even if it's not currently there. Have an open mind to build more of that peer-to-peer in there, because I don't know anybody, well, I can't say anybody that only had one arrest.
Yeah.
And it's a lot larger than that.
Mm-hmm. So the third scenario is sort of this gang prosecutor or gang investigator who, is going to get approval for an arrest warrant. They want to arrest the pimp and the bottom. Those are in quotes. Those are terms of art for this purpose. And we've got a senior prosecutor in an organized crime unit, and they basically are in charge of reviewing this warrant. they're okaying or not okaying these arrests. And that's a person that very well may not know anything about trafficking if their organized crime unit is usually doing things like gangs, narcotics, even like, Medicare fraud. We had a lot of that in Florida. Our organized crime unit was doing those types of crimes. And all of a sudden they're asked to, okay this. And if you listen to our last webinar on, charging decisions and, what a bottom is and isn't, like that's a big intervention point that might be completely missed. And now you've got an on-ramp for somebody that really doesn't need to have that on-ramp into the criminal justice system. And Joy, I put this last one in there just for you, which is, like a survivor is entering a plea of no contest to a forgery charge. The court is asking for a pre-sentence investigation and maybe a sentencing recommendation. A probation officer comes out and interviews you, and they're filing something with the court. How important is that point of intervention?
Well, it's very important. I, for example, got arrested on an aggravated forgery charge. No one asked me why, how, what, where, when it came to where they even found me doing forgery at the level of forgery I was doing. I mean, this wasn't just a candy bar or some makeup. This is actually hundreds of thousands of dollars that I was writing checks for. My ID was made professionally. Here, I'm like 20, 24. I'm not capable of doing all that, but no one asked me when my trafficker had me doing all this. And then when they arrested me, the way they talked to me as if I knew all this stuff about the traffic, about the forgery ring, but no one asked me how I got involved in it or who was running it as far as my involvement with them, who gave me the checks, none of that. So when we talk about intersections of where you can actually jump in and assist, had someone asked me, have you been held against your will? Had someone asked me, were you being forced to do this? They would have had a hope. I mean, I even gave a name like Jim Jones, okay? So these red flags come up and all they could see was that I was the criminal lying to them, but they didn't ask me why I was lying to them. They didn't even ask as far as where was I going to go when they did let me go, if they let me go, who's going to pick me up? No questions were asked like that. Yeah. And when I got to the judge's words were, well, why don't you fight this case? Because he asked me, why are you pleading guilty to something that you feel you didn't do? I said, well, let's not waste the court's time with my record of who I am viewed as, the prostituted, drug addicted female. Who's going to believe me? And he said, well, you'll have a jury of your peers. And I had to laugh at that. I said, is it my peers? Are they going to be girls like me up there, or guys with like my guy, or these someone else's peers? And he had to say, point taken. So that showed that he knew nothing about it, but he didn't ask me no questions either, but he understood what I was saying. He just gave me a sentence and let me go to jail.
Yep. And so, I mean, this is sort of just what you've all been saying, is going over each level of, different courts. All the different courts all need the training, everybody in the court. I know when we were going through these, Jeri had a quote that I wrote down, which was, everybody all the way to the janitor needs to be trained.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then within prosecution and law enforcement, you guys are really familiar with these. Love it when there's a specialized human trafficking unit, because that level of specialization can really make a difference. Not possible in every office around the country. So we want to be thinking about all the other places where these where there's intersection. So a vice unit, anybody involved in the juvenile justice, and somebody sort of put in the chat that there's a real difficulty with, and I don't think it's unique to juvenile prosecution, but when we talk about assessing culpability, Joy, you're talking about aggravated forgery, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and this person's asking about, well, what do we do when it's not just money, but it's actually maybe crimes of violence being perpetrated? And I think that's really those difficult places. And I would encourage you to, if you're struggling with that, go back and listen to the assessing culpability piece. I think that webinar, it's already recorded on our website, really does a deeper dive than we have time to do today. But I think that's exactly why we need this level of training, is because these are hard decisions. This isn't an easy one. And so all of these folks that are involved, you're going to be intersected. And then there's these additional sort of justice system allies, whether it be different agencies that are intersecting. I think Department of Children and Families, that's an easy one. A lot of us, that was one of the first folks that got involved in this work. But we should also be thinking about our housing authorities. They have a lot to do with supporting victims, and also witness intimidation and being able to relocate victims. I mean, those are just some idea of who should be involved. Our communities, all the folks, medical, urgent care, Planned Parenthood, schools, tribal communities, and other places where victims and survivors may be, accessing services that aren't directly related to us. So shelters and food banks and rehabilitation services and facilities.
And Jane, can I jump in there really quick?
Go for it.
One of the things, and I'm really glad that you put tribal communities in here, because I don't know where everybody is on this webinar geographically, but I know in Washington State we have 29 tribes, and I really push to include the tribes and tribal representation. And like 8 out of 10 times I will ask somebody, say the director of the domestic violence program, I'd say, hey, have you been invited to be part of the, statewide task force? And they're like, no, what is it? And so, a lot of, and then I've heard people say, oh, well, we called once and talked to somebody and they didn't seem receptive. And I was like, how long ago was it? Oh, 2017, and so you have to look at, not only are these justice system allies, but they need to be nurtured. And they need to be respected. And I think that it's really important to be able to have those relationships.
Yeah, a one-time ask is not probably going to be there. You know what I mean? Like, just say, hey, here's one invitation, you didn't show up. Like, we really need to be, like you said, nurturing those connections.
I see somebody put a question in our chat box of would I been open to telling officers the truth about why I was doing what I was doing, what's really going on, etc. And do many in the same situation, would they be open to it? 9 times out of 10, it's an individually based scenario first and foremost. You can't put everybody in one chain. It's an opportunity to at least try, so you can at least say you tried. Would I have spoke at that time with the fear that I had in me? Probably not, but it would have at least showed me that you cared enough to ask me more than to view me as a criminal and basically just go ahead and be trying to figure out how you're going to charge me or what you're going to charge me with. You at least would have been communicating with me, so that I would have seen that at least somebody wanted to know the truth, even if I didn't take you on for that opportunity. And that's called planting a seed, because the next investigator I see, I may feel I can tell them time. So it's not so much of getting it done at that moment, it's just being the person to at least plant the seed and open or crack the door. Because my pimp has told me, all you're gonna do is tell me lies, you're not gonna believe nothing I say, and you're gonna charge me anyway. So that's the story I have in my head.
And I think that's, great question. I think one of the things that I always struggle with, because Jeri, you mentioned, this uniform screening tool, which we need to have things uniform, but I also see folks use those screening tools like this. Have you ever been held against your will? Has anyone ever told you to do this?
Right. Conversations go a long way.
No. Building trust is imperative. You only look for red flags and indicators, when you first meet somebody.
Yeah.
You don't have a piece of paper, you look at, I could go on and on. You're going to have to invite me and Joy back because I'm very, very passionate about this. And if anybody's interested, if anybody's interested, we did a project for the, oh goodness, I think it was National Institute of Justice, where we did a life domain screening, and it's been published. I think it needs a lot of work, but I think we were on the right track.
Yeah.
You can't do what you're talking about. And then we're also, with disengaged staff, it makes it even worse. So sorry, I'm passionate about that.
Do not apologize for your passion.
Right. Defense attorney, I'm looking at our chat and I said this throws me off every time. There was a question about if your client is being represented, if the criminal is being so-called criminal, is being presented with an attorney, how do you get to them? And you think there's sex trafficking or trafficking going on, but you have to address their attorney. We talked about this. The things I brought up about defense attorneys being educated in this as well, because they too need to understand that these opportunities to assist in connecting victims to service is really important. That's where maybe a plea bargain could come into place. You know what I mean? Versus the charge that you may have them for. And advocates are really good. So speaking to advocates and bringing them in to maybe do part of or be sitting in on the interview could be a good way to do it. When you're investigating is bringing an advocate or a survivor in with that investigation so that they may be able to reach the victim where you can't because you're the prosecutor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think this is a place where we can really be doing better. Historically, prosecutors and defense, that's a adversarial relationship. And in this regard, we need to be building bridges. We need to be telling the defense bar, hey, we want to know if you're representing somebody that's a victim. And we need to be walking the walk, which means that when defense attorneys do tell us that, we need to be contemplating dropping charges, providing immunity, providing mitigation packets. Like, we need to be walking the walk to then build that relationship. From my personal experience in Miami, it took a while. I had like a template email. I'd be happy to share with you guys if you contact me after this, a template email that said, hey, I see some red flags, help me help your client.
There you go.
See what we can do. It will, your client's situation will never get worse. It might end up a full dismissal. It might end up, just some mitigation. It might,
oh no.
We called them a queen for the day letter so that we could have a conversation where they weren't, weren't putting themselves in jeopardy with anything that they said during that conversation. I think they talked about that again in the last webinar too, but it's really, we've got to be building that bridge. And so when we're talking about who needs to be trained, we can also talk about like what topics, right? So some folks, the janitor, for example, may just need the HT 101.
Correct.
Which is like, what are the red flags and dispelling those myths, right? And then of course, everyone in the criminal justice system that's making decisions really needs to know about those complex dynamics that we went over with in webinar 1 and webinar 2. And then the folks that are really making systematic decisions and changes and are sort of that leadership tier, and others too. I mean, I would give everyone this, but thinking about it so you're not overwhelming the system, those folks need to know about racism, complex trauma, ACE factors or adverse childhood experience factors and how they are implemented. So not everybody needs all of this, but there's definitely this sort of tiered and more advanced training that some folks need access to. And so, but all of it needs to be solution-based response planning. I don't know if either one of you wanted to kind of talk about what that means a little bit.
I personally feel when we talk about solution-based, we go through a lot of trainings. You get a lot of information. But what do you do with that information when you walk away? Now, I've been in the social service field now 20 years on this side of the fence, so to speak. And when I think about all the trainings I've been through, no one gives you the information to do something, that solution that we talk about. And so build trainings that actually say, when you leave here, here's 1, 2, 3, plan A, B, and C, that you're going to be able to take from here and now go try to implement this in the powers, in your circle, whether it's personal, whether it's professional. So when we're talking about solution-based and having a response, rapid response is very important. Because when we're talking about working with individuals that are coming out of this lifestyle, the window is so small. We don't have like weeks and weeks to wait for this, because individuals are out of your grip in like 2 seconds and then it's gone. So your opportunity is gone. So thinking about this in a complex way of, if you know the middle one, then bringing individuals in to work with you on that. So connecting in the communities and trying to find your service providers, which we're going to talk more about that down the road here. I just think it's really important.
I love that too. It's a pet peeve of mine when I go to a training, lots of here's the problem, and no strategies. And so we're going to give you some, even more than we've already done.
Yeah, I just wanted to add really quickly, we all have a part in supporting survivors, supporting victims, bringing people to justice. We all have a role. And I think that if we don't look at things through a strength-based lens and a, multidisciplinary planning, we're actually harming victims. We are. And once somebody is brave enough to, extend their hand out and say, walk alongside me because I need help, if we don't have the systems in place and make sure that we under promise and over deliver, we have to. And, being able to break those silos down and also, even in our case notes, what is a strength-based way? And I've read some case notes that just made the individual sound like, they were a troublemaker. And, you really have to make sure that in your notes, you are coming from a strength-based lens, because you may not be the only one that's reading those, and it can really cause a bias down the road.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask you to maybe talk a little bit more about that when we're talking about actually working with those victim survivor or victim service professionals, and some of those tips I think are going to really be key there. But I wanted to sort of maybe take a little bit of a diversion right now and talk about how not only is our system need to respond better to people that are coming in, but we need to realize that our system is also sometimes where trafficking happens. Right. So I call this little section from jail to bail to sale, and trying to make sure that we're strategizing and eliminating on-ramps that are within our system itself. So the perfect victim for a trafficker is really somebody that is accessible, somebody that has a vulnerability, and somebody who the trafficker perceives the credibility to be low, right? So they won't be believed. So who is the perfect victim? Somebody that's already within the criminal justice system. And we've seen some very recent examples of folks finally identifying this piece. I don't want to say it's a new phenomenon, because in Miami, we had several cases where, a survivor would tell me how they met their trafficker was he just drove up when he knew the jail was releasing the inmates that had, paid their bail that day or whatnot. And we've also seen this where people are identifying through public records or through connections to the bond system. They're identifying vulnerable inmates. I mean, it's almost like they can look through like a catalog because the mugshot is there, and the charge is there, and they can be like, oh, look at this one. This looks like somebody that I could identify, maybe write to, maybe deposit money in their commissary, maybe arrange for their release, and then insist on repayment or insist on this sort of thing. So this is a perfect kind of formula for trafficking within our system itself. A lot more work has been done on this topic than we have time to delve into today. One of our survivors that we work with, Nikki Bell, is highlighted in this Guardian article and video called "The Trap." It's available online. Both of them are, and I really encourage folks to look at that, because we need to make sure we're looking in our own backyards, right? And so we do have some strategies, right? Not just problems, but I want to give you guys strategies. And one of them is like, familiarize yourself. We're constantly referring people to diversion programs or other sort of court-ordered or court-affiliated programming. Do we know what their regulations are? Do they have licensing requirements? Who's overseeing them? Is there any sort of oversight mechanism? Some recent articles have been highlighting rehab facilities where trafficking has been in and out of, and those are sometimes court-ordered. Diversion programs, ALF or assisted living facilities, where they're getting people out of jail because they may have, you know, a mental health issue, but they also have a social security check. And so these programs are set up, and they're really set up in a way that makes it a perfect formula for trafficking. So we need to be training everybody. Those defense attorneys are there again, the probation officers, those same folks. We need to be thinking about those specialized courtrooms so everybody's eyes are a little bit more focused on these issues. And then monitoring what's happening in jails, the calls, the visits. Are our jail personnel, if they're corrections or they're the sheriff's department, do they know about this? Are they looking to report? And then if they even see the red flags, if they know what's going on, have we empowered them to report that to somebody? Sometimes it's just a phone number or an email address. And, you know, this is the person if you see something weird, right? And then I was that person in Miami, and I was more than happy to have more emails than I could deal with than nobody telling me anything, right? How many times is it like, oh yeah, we saw that, and we just never, we didn't know who to talk to about it. And then the final one is to encourage in-custody programming, so that folks that are in custody are educating themselves, and we're supporting even incarcerated victims and survivors. So those are the strategies that I put out for that one. And then I wanted to ask you guys about diversion courts. It's specifically talking about like prostitution diversion courts or human trafficking diversion courts, or sometimes they're called girls' courts. What are your thoughts about them? Jeri, I'm going to start with you.
You know, I actually, as long as they are pre-conviction, I really feel that there can be an amazing opportunity to intersect with people where, you know, I mean, if somebody is in jail or they're in a treatment center and they're you know, feeling this need to talk to somebody, I mean, we really need to build that into the court system. You know, what does that really look like? You know, and you know, who is safe? And you know, is it disclosure to law enforcement? Is it connecting with peer-led organizations? You know, and we just need to do this in a systematic way that is going to ensure safety, not only for the victim survivor or, you know, and their family, but also secondary trauma through people that are you know, working with directly with victims.
Joy, what do you think? I know we sort of put this slide as, you know, all these opportunities, right, that it provides us, but there's these challenges too that I think are nagging at a lot of us that do this work.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, while working at with Miss Benita at Breaking Free, there was a law enforcement had came up with a good thing where they actually, instead of arresting the girls, they gave them a citation. But prior to that, they had a diversion program. The problem I see with diversion is you have a record, okay? They arrest you. So you have a record, you have to be on this program for a year or 6 months to a year and jump through all the hoops that they want you to jump through. So really you got something hanging over your head that if you don't complete these things, you make one mistake, they're going to charge you and you are going to serve whatever time they've got hanging over your head. So it's like having a noose waiting to lynch you. And with our pimps and traffickers out here, they're going to create obstacles for you, even though you stay away from them, but you're the one who's going to be charged when POs or whoever see, oh, she didn't finish, oh, she's hanging with such and such, when in fact that's not how it went down, but I get the charge.
Yeah.
The citation program was more of a police arrested, they didn't arrest the girls, they actually wrote a citation and put it on what they called a save wall. So working with law enforcement to see if they can come up with some creativity as well, and working with the agencies to see if they can be like the point people that they send individuals to. So part of what they did was they gave them a card when they ran across a victim and that was being sexually exploited. And they said, you got 24 hours to contact the organization on this card. And they would check in and have a point person. And while there, they had to just complete the groups and then stay out of trouble. And once they completed it, they would toss the citation. It wouldn't even go through the system. So therefore, they diverted an arrest on their record, as well as, having a conviction. And it went really well.
Yeah, I think the takeaway here is that this is all well intended, and we need to make sure that when we develop these programs, we're spending a lot of time on opening up the opportunities. And we're spending a lot of time trying to figure out how do we reduce this other side of the chart, right? So fees and fines, is it accessible? Like you said, your traffickers are putting obstacles in your way. How can we make sure that's not something that, this can't be a tool for traffickers to control you even more? Like, is it effective, right? We know that peer support is one of the most effective pieces of this. So can we up that piece? And can we limit the risk of criminalization, even if you don't, you don't complete it? And then we have to really look at bias in referrals. I have been working with some people around the country, and we've seen, anecdotally at the very least, that there's a bias in who's even being given these opportunities to maybe go into diversion. So a couple of articles I put on this slide, I really encourage people to be doing a deeper dive. If you're working with a diversion court or you're thinking of setting one up, there's also a program called Mosaics that are providing TA training and technical assistance to diversion courts around the country. Lots of people want to be doing this the right way. Let's set it up the right way, because at the end of the day, if these are truly victims, why are we making them do anything?
Anything, right?
So lots of opportunity for conversations there, but I think the building the better off ramp, and this is where I want you guys to dive a little bit deeper in the next few slides, is identify those barriers, the barriers to exiting. As Keisha said so eloquently in webinar number 1, it's one thing to leave your trafficker, it's another thing to leave the life.
Right.
So what are those barriers? I see these nods, I love it. How can we start to break them down or minimize them or provide people resources to get over them? And then providing consistent, individualized, client-centered support. So this is that public health focus. Jeri, if we could have you talk a little bit about what are the key elements to what you're consider this public health focus.
Yeah, thank you. And, I just really think that it's important, just like that graphics we showed earlier, there's the victims and survivors that are in the middle. And that needs to be what the focus is. And especially when we're dealing with the criminal justice system, a lot of times, historically, it hasn't been trauma informed. And, it was the feeling of they just want a conviction and they want the conviction off my back and not caring. And so it's really important to have this public health approach, which would be making sure that their emergency needs are met. And, really figuring out the why, asking more questions that are, trauma informed instead of the what's wrong with you or whatever, and really, really dig deeper. And I think it's important to really, I use the 80-20 rule. So if, somebody's talking, you do 80% listening and maybe 20% talking, and you never interrupt individuals. And, a lot of times you have to really connect them with peer advocates, because, the thing about it is that if we don't have the support that we need, it's one thing, like you said, one thing to leave your trafficker, but another thing to leave the life. And so what are those tools that we need? What are those? And those include funding programs, getting a plan around re-entry, and really also looking at a whole family approach. So we have that upstream, because I've been doing this work long enough where I'm seeing second, third generations. And, it's just, it's got to stop. So yeah. The public health focus is a wonderful way to, do survivor-centered planning. And yeah.
I love this idea of like buy-in from the survivor.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're always thinking like, oh, we're giving you all this stuff, but we're not really asking, what do you need? What can we do to help you? And I think that's one of those sort of shifts that we need to be making, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the reassessment, because that immediate needs are not going to look the same as midterm needs and long-term needs. So I want to go through, these are examples that we used in webinar 1 to explain some of the barriers that were out there. And one of the ones that I think was maybe for those of us that come from the prosecution side, maybe the least, it didn't come to mind right away. This idea of the known, that the life becomes what you know and who you feel accepted by, and that nobody else really understands. Mm-hmm. And you can get into this cycle. So thinking about that, somebody that's maybe engaged in that thought process, how could we start building off ramps for someone like that's thinking that?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, I think we've mentioned it. I just think cannot be mentioned enough is, okay, if it's all about the known, that first connection would be someone else who knows.
Mm-hmm.
Survivors are key. I'd rather talk to somebody who knows what I've been through, who's been through what I've been through, who's lived it, and who got out. That's the other piece. They're out doing it. So that's somebody who's a role model for me. A very big, important piece when I got out was seeing an organization that's all they did. Vanita Carter has been a role model of mine for years, and she's on this con. I'm honored that she came in. And it's like watching someone get out and seeing them go forward and successfully, make a career, talking to them and knowing I didn't have to go into all the details because they already understood. That made it so much easier. It really does. It's really key to a lot of things.
It is, and I just really want to add something, and like I said earlier, we don't know the geographical area of everybody that's, on this webinar, but if you don't know a survivor in your area, there's a couple of things. The survivor needs to be in a healing position.
Correct.
To be able to do this work. And it's not like you have an assessment or anything like that, but if you don't have somebody in your area, reach out, throughout AEquitas, there's a lot of different people, follow us on Facebook. There's different branches of the government that will offer TA, technical assistance, that is survivor led. just got to be, it has to be a priority, but we have to make sure that we're really building a caring community. And so in early, when, this is when survivors are leaving their situation, that's safety in crisis. And we have to get basic needs, immediate needs, all the way down from, what is the immediate need? It could be that you need a car window because your abuser broke out all your car windows and you got evicted. Now you're living in your car. So windows, well, we work on housing. It could be anything from food, whatever that is. And, connecting them with an organization that can do developing a plan, and then help them, not lead them, share space with them and let them lead as they progress through phase 2 and phase 3. And this can really look different to everybody, but I can tell you this, we don't have a magic genie bottle. We don't. And you know what? I wish that, all of our heart and our passion, that we could just let these new people that are trying to get out into our heads and know that it's hard, but it's worth it. It is so worth it. And honestly, it takes time. And trauma victims don't come in pretty packages. They don't.
You're kidding.
No. And, having that support, natural support and paid support, which would include, your mental health providers and culture and mentors and all of those different things that need to, come around in an MDT fashion, because it takes time. And, really, when we're looking at the process, it's like, I don't know how many times I tried or contemplated and just believed all the lies that were told to me, that I could never make it on my own, that I'm stupid, all those other things. But when I had people come around me and speak life, I was able to move forward. And, I'm not scared to say that, we're awesome.
Yes, we are.
We are awesome. And it's not just us. I mean, there is so many survivor leaders out there that are just, seriously like kicking butt and taking names and changing the entire culture of how we look at commercial sexual exploitation and victimization. So.
And I love this graphic. And only thing I would add is, those of you out there listening, if you're a prosecutor, law enforcement, whatever your role is, like this could be you throwing out that line. And it doesn't just have to be the survivor saying, I can do it. It can be us saying, you can do it. That's strength-based programming, right? And saying, look at your survivor already. Look at what you've already survived. You can do this. Let's show you other people that can, and let's give you the whatever rope you need. And you can do that. So I want to be that rope right there that's helping the survivor get where the survivor wants to be. So
I had a PO that was really, I just have to throw it out there. I had a PO that was really awesome. I don't care how many times I missed the class.
Oh, a probation officer.
Probation officer, sorry. A probation officer who actually was that lifeline. She could have violated me and threw me away, God knows how many times. But she kept giving me opportunities because she knew I had to go to 20,000 different places, which that's a challenge within itself. So she would say, this is your last time now. I can't keep letting you slide. And her giving me those opportunities and not slamming the book on me actually made me go ahead and take a step to try. When I did it, we ended up sitting on a board together. And she said, watching you grow and do what you're doing, she said, restored my faith. Because we get caught up in that, how many criminals are coming through, you know, the numbers, they're a number. No, I'm a human being and we're not all the same. And I need that extra opportunity. You know, I might have slid, you know, that meeting. That doesn't mean you have to slam the hammer and everything I'm saying is negative and wrong and a lie and deceitful. Opportunity is something it's gonna hurt to give me one more time.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to throw that out there. She was awesome. Kim Johnson.
Yeah.
I feel like, you know, everyone has those stories in life, you know, that one person that made a difference.
Yes.
You know, and so, you know, strive to be that person. So how do we figure out, you know, the survey of our victim services and who we should be referring folks to, who should be working with collaboratively on our task forces or whatnot? And so I put together this little graphic, which is, okay, figure out the needs. And I have to tell you, because it's such an individualized thing, every survivor I worked with, I was like, oh, there's another need. I never thought I needed a dentist or you know, a safe shield window repair, right? So that's going to be constantly reassessing. That's why it's that circle. And then survey, like, who is in your jurisdiction? Who's already doing this work or similar work? Figure out a way to vet that service provider. Right? Not every service provider out there that holds themselves out there is doing good work and really doing the right work. And then continually try to figure out, okay, what are our gaps? Like, we don't have, you know, anybody serving male victims might be a gap, or we don't have anyone that has any Black staff.
Right.
Or, you know, Indigenous staff, whatever that is, and then work on building capacity. Whether that be, you know, looking at grant opportunities or just working with existing service providers that are doing good work and could just expand the work that they're doing. So I want to think about mapping those victim service providers. And I love what you guys were talking about, is like thinking beyond those immediate needs, thinking about who's already serving high risk populations. But Joy, you touched on this idea of barriers to access when you were talking about all your appointments. And I don't know if you can talk a little bit more about just what does it mean to be accessible? Like, to make it work for you.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, I had to do community service hours. I had to go to a parenting class. I had to go to, and they were all scattered all over. Now, I'm homeless. Okay, I don't have transportation to any of these things, and probation didn't provide it. So my question was, well, how did they think I was going to get there but to hitchhike, which I'm known to do when in the streets doing prostitution? So why are you shocked that I ended up back in the lifestyle? It's like a setup for me to fail. Not to mention, while going to these places, if I was able to take the bus or do whatever, there are so many opportunities for drug addiction to go back, you know, triggers to be happening, dope dealers to run into, pimps finding me while I'm en route to these places, or running into new pimps that are going to recruit me, and I'm already seasoned. So something I loved about one of the agencies that I work with is that it was a one-stop shop. So I could do volunteer time there, and it counted as my STS. I was able to go to all my groups there. They had parenting there. I could meet one-on-one with the advocate, and that counted as an extra group piece. So working with providers to see what all can be done right there in that one spot versus having the victim run around to 20,000 places that will then lead an opportunity for them to be whisked away back into the trauma.
Yeah.
It's real important.
Yeah. Encouraging them to hire and pay and employ other survivors.
Correct.
And acknowledging that there's going to be some distrust of systems, right? You know, not just distrust of police and prosecutors, but folks that are working with us, that distrust could get onto them as well. Supporting those culturally specific services and engaging with charitable and professional organizations that are willing to become trauma informed. And that may be your dentist that's willing to do some pro bono work, but you can't just let them do the pro bono work. You've got to give them some training as well. Make sure that they're not saying something triggering We're doing some trauma-informed work. I mean, we've worked with accountants because, you know, we've had folks that haven't filed their taxes and that was something that was over their head, or they don't have any credit. So it's a really wide net of who we can be working with. But I wanted you guys to talk about this concept of by and for organizations, and what types of populations might we want to be looking at, and what they can provide to our victims that, you know, maybe other organizations don't necessarily do as well or can do better.
I'll go ahead and jump in here. As I mentioned before, I am Native American, and we are considered a by and for organization. We get different contracts, different work that they want us to, you know, target the demographic of either people on reservations or, you know, urban natives. And I think it is amazing because we, you know, in that funding or, you know, whatever the project is, they're coming to us for, you know, we want to do this right. We just don't want, you know, to go in and tell them what to do. No, it needs to be Native led and by and for. And, you know, every single group of individuals, you know, deserve to have their voice heard. And I think it's becoming a lot more socially acceptable to include everybody than it used to be. And super important.
Yeah, and I think
go
ahead.
You go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say this first one was like recognizing that it's not a monolith, right? Because if you know, you have an organization that maybe has one advocate that's Black, and then that's your one Black person. There's like a tokenism there, where if it's by and for, you get the nuances, and you get to figure out, like, not all people are the same. It's not a monolith, and that folks there's intersectionality. There's more likely this population may have historical and generational trauma, what looks different than acute trauma, and also can understand what those barriers may be that aren't as obvious as to other folks.
It's really important because you're not going to understand. I don't care how much I explain it to you. I don't care how many trainings you go to. Until you have been impacted and affected by this, you're not going to understand it. It's going to be, you know, that novel that you read. But you can assist. And I think it's real important to say this. This is all about talking to a person about what's going to work for them, because you want to help them be successful. So one, you don't got to prosecute them again. You know what I mean? If you can get them on the road and this was a bad situation for them and we can get them out of this, but talking to me and asking me what's going to work for me versus you telling me what's going to work for me, and you have no idea where I've been, nor will you ever understand it, is the best gift you can give to a victim, is asking them what's going to work for them.
I love it.
Yes.
And this is from the Department of Justice, the Department of Health and Humanities, the Department of Homeland Security. This report that came out, I think in 2017 maybe, but basically the federal government going, survivors play a key role in elevating and understanding awareness of trafficking. It's coming from the top. If you're applying for grants, they want to know how you're integrating survivors and how you're pushing them past, oh, we've got a survivor on our board to say this is led, this is being developed, this is by and for. So a big piece of it. But, you know, I'm going to go into like prosecutor zone real quick here and do some ethical considerations when we're working with victim service providers. We need to make sure we're understanding confidentiality because a systems-based victim service provider, somebody that's working out of a police station or out of our own prosecutor's offices, that will not usually be a confidential relationship. And so we'll have some Brady and some Giglio issues. If it's a community-based organization, there's oftentimes statutory confidentiality going on there. So So look at what it looks like in your state and then honor that. Don't try to subpoena their records. Don't try to, subpoena them. Make sure that if the defense is doing that, that you are you're standing up for their confidentiality, and that you're advising them to maybe even get their own attorneys to do that, and be prepared to litigate those issues. Comply with your obligations under Giglio and Brady. Typically, if it's a community-based service provider, they do not need to report all the services that they've provided to your victim. If it's a gift card or whatnot, they're not part of the prosecution team. There's a case that talks about who is and who isn't part of the prosecution team. And the prosecution team usually refers to people that are investigating and directing trial strategy. So our community-based service providers, that's not something we need to be making sure that they're complying with. Now, we haven't saved ourselves much time, but I do want to make sure we talk about criminal record relief, why it's so important and why it's so difficult. But first, I want to tell the prosecutors out there that this is actually a responsibility. This is an ethical duty of yours. And under the ABA model rules, we actually have the ethical duty to remedy convictions that were wrongful. We have to be seeking those remedies. And so obviously sometimes this comes up in a really obvious way where there's, a DNA is clearing somebody, but I would ask you to look further and say, do we have a responsibility to say, you know what, we weren't thinking about all of these prostitution arrests and other arrests for decades and decades. And now we know about trafficking and exploitation. Shall we be remedying these proactively? Put that out there, and then talk about sort of reactive tools that we have. The Polaris Project, in conjunction with some other folks, put out this really fantastic state report card where they're going state by state talking about what types of record relief are available, what is the best kind, what are harder kinds. And so sealing records or hiding them from private entities, the file still exists. Expungement is the record is erased, but the fact of the arrest or the conviction may still appear there for law enforcement, which of course is going to bias law enforcement if they ever have contact with you again. And then the final one is the vacatur. That's the strongest. Your conviction is nullified, you are exonerated, and it basically alters the underlying merits of the case. And so it would be much more akin to a pardon. So those are our three kinds. When we look at what is this is the report card that Polaris and that project put together and how they graded different states. And I want to focus on a couple of them with you, you ladies, please. So offenses covered. Are only prostitution cases covered? A lot of states, that's the case. Is that effective?
No, not at all. Considering I got gun charges, theft, I've got auto charges, I've got even some they put on there. So yeah, no.
Yeah, so we want to make sure that this is broader, right? And then what about the sort of burden of proof? What do you have to bring to court to say, hey, I'm a trafficking victim? Has anyone tried to have you guys tried to do this? Yeah. I said, I've heard stories where the prosecution was like requiring the victim to like have an affidavit from their pimp or from other victims. Is that effective? Are we doing any favors to our victims when this happens, survivors?
I'll get that to you right away.
So yeah, we need to be opening these up, making these more effective for folks. And even when we're kind of stuck with our law, as prosecutors, we can widen those off-ramps, right? We can approve applications without that documentation. If we look and we internally look at our records and we know what's happening, right? So that review should be by somebody with specialized training. We should accept the survivor's account of their lived experience. We shouldn't be requiring anything more. We should be assessing culpability on those like non-prostitution charges through a trauma-informed lens. Everybody should watch the last two webinars before they make these calls. Don't insist on this burdensome standard of proof. Don't insist on this documentation. Allow relief for whatever is appropriate. Recognize that there are greater benefits to providing relief. I once asked somebody who was like a stickler for this, what is society benefiting from this woman having a record that leaves her unable to have housing or employment? What is our benefit to maintain that misdemeanor charge? Like, what are we accomplishing here?
Correct. Correct.
And I said, even if she's lying, like, you know what I mean? Taking it to that level, it still is a better situation to have somebody out there that now is going to work and have housing, right? So, and then consider alternative means of relief. Sometimes the law will not allow us to do that, but you know what? We can reopen a case and just dismiss it. There's always ways we can help when we want to. So let's widen those off ramps. And then you guys, this is me as the prosecutor and working with survivors and witnesses. And I just want to say there's a ton of slides that are available to you and you're going to have there. But I want to start off with, there are crime victims' rights. And so if somebody comes to us as a victim or a witness, we need to be upholding their rights. And those are to be protected from the accused, to have notice, to be included in decisions, and to be free from harassment, to get restitution. This is not just what we should do, but we must do this. And so justice due to the accused, is also due to the accuser. And if the concept of fairness must not be strained until it is a narrow filament, we must keep that balance true, making sure that we're serving our victims and survivors that we're working with. So we want to be survivor-centered while being offender-focused, right? Keep the spotlight on what the offender did, right? The offender is responsible for that trauma. That offender is responsible for everything and for that victim being with us to begin with. So lots of things that we can do, prioritizing safety, keeping the focus on them. But I wanted to talk to you two while I have you, because these slides everyone will have about protective orders and rape shield. But this idea of transparency, right? And how important it is to you if you were working with a prosecutor on a case to know what was happening.
Very important. It's very important. Oh, to the utmost. When you think about, you're asking me basically to put my life in jeopardy by giving you information that when I walk out of here could get me killed. It'll win you your case, but it'll get me killed. So knowing what you're going to do with that information, knowing how it's going to be, like it's not, people are going to have access to me and my information. It's real important that you make me aware of that in the beginning so that I can maybe assist you, but in a roundabout way so that it's not directly coming from me, or I can point you to someone else. But it's very important that you tell me exactly what's going on. Don't promise me the farm, telling me you're going to work with me, you'll help, all that crap. And then as soon as your case is won, I don't hear from you, you're not there, you drop me off, and I go right back to the wolves.
And that, I think this last question I have here is sort of in line with what you guys were talking about with what's going to work for you. Also, what does safety mean to you? How can we keep you safe? And what does that mean to be safe? Some folks, it's not about, being moved across the country. But sometimes it is about, all I need is new housing, or I need something else. And so not assuming we know best for you.
Exactly. And, when we're really looking at safety planning and transparency, it is really important, because first of all, there could be 1,000 different things going through, the survivor's head, really been brainwashed not to trust anything to do with law enforcement, anything to do with the courts, and having, real fear and be in that trauma response. And so, letting them know who's going to see this, what's the reason, what is safety, what do you need for safety, and never promise safety unless you can really come through.
Right.
Yeah. And autonomy, this is super important. It is. I mean, let them lead. And I know that Joy has more experience around, being an expert witness, and so forth. But I also love the last bullet, not to force the victim to testify. And there's a lot of ways that it used to be based on their testimony and kind of got ripped apart, but now there's like a lot of other ways, and I don't really know about them, but I'm happy that things are progressing.
Yes, we call that evidence-based investigations and prosecutions. And the idea, exactly, Jeri, is we're not building a case on a victim, we're building a case around a victim.
Correct.
Sometimes we can proceed without a victim altogether. Kind of a rare situation to do it completely without a victim, but we can definitely do it where the case isn't just riding on the victim's shoulders altogether. We can use expert witnesses. Lots of digital evidence can help build and support our case. Other eye and ear witnesses. AEquitas has a ton of resources on this type of thing. But, to the best of our ability, conduct those up front, educate, let the survivor know what to expect, even maybe connect them with somebody who has testified, right? So again, trying to constantly look at how we can be more like peer-to-peer support, and then be honest about what you have control over and what you don't have control over. Both as the prosecutor, I don't have control over everything either, and what sort of decisions I can have you drive. And sometimes, I'm sorry, but a survivor can't drive everything within the criminal justice system. But ultimately, we want to make sure we're having conversations about what justice looks like. Having some expectation management, and then do not force the victim to testify. We want to support so that hopefully they're able to participate, because we've done all this great work up front and they don't feel like the weight of the world is on their shoulders, and they feel safe and they feel supported. But at the end of the day, we are not forcing a victim to testify. We're not using material witness warrants or bonds or anything like that.
I just gotta say one thing. I was at a training with the trafficking task force, and they had them from all over the United States. And they were talking about Homeland Security was there, ICE was there, and they were doing the training and stuff. And what they talked about was there's other ways to build a case. I think the piece that gets missed is we want to get this trafficker, and this is a sex trafficking case. No, the goal is to get this monster off the streets. And if you do it with the victim, without the victim, there's other ways. He's committed other crimes that you can get him, because at the end of the day, it's about getting him out of the picture so we can work or him, because this is a male and female are affected by this. So I think it's
I call it the Al Capone style of prosecution.
Yes.
He went down for tax evasion, but he went down.
Yes. He went down long term. It was really
and we can't forget buyer accountability, and that's a whole nother webinar.
It's a whole nother webinar.
And it's just very important.
Opening that can of worms. Yeah. So I think that's a great segue into, now that we've heard all of this, how do we achieve justice, right? And so I want you guys all, I'd love you to type that into the chat, thinking about after what you've heard, maybe if you have a different answer or you have a bigger answer. We'd also love to hear, if we provided you with something that you could really take away today, and maybe implement right away, right? Some of these are more systematic changes that we're asking for, but some of it is just, I'm not going to be beholden to my checklist anymore. I'm going to have conversations. You can do that today. So moving forward, we'd really love it if everyone is thinking about intentionally, where are those intervention points? How can we make sure anybody that's making decisions at those points is trauma informed and knows about trafficking and about the complex dynamics that are occurring? Making sure we're implementing survivor-centered trauma-informed practices, including survivor-led organizations, buy-in for organizations, and then really just increasing our off-ramps, widening those off-ramps, making more of those off-ramps. And a big piece of that is that criminal record relief. So thank you guys so much. As we've mentioned already, 2 prior webinars. They're available online right now, both similar style, both amazing survivors, experts that are guiding you through these really complex topics, right? And then all of this is part of our new initiative called Just Exits, survivor-led project, Survivor Advisory Council. Thank you so much, Joy and Jeri, for being a part of it. And what we're doing is we're trying to identify sites that want us and our expertise to come in and maybe do a deeper dive and support you in making some of these bigger changes. So reach out to us if you're interested in learning more about becoming one of our sites. We would love to work with you. And then this is all of our contact informations, and I'll let both Joy and Jeri say a couple of closing remarks, and we thank you so much. Joy?
I just want to say one big thing that always is something that I end like my trainings with, my stuff that I educate in the community, is that individuals you encounter that are sexually exploited are members of our community.
Yes.
They community member. They have fallen on hard times for whatever reason. They're still people. They're still part of this community, and we need to remember they're going to want to get back in the community. And if we're going to make it so hard, then we're part of the problem. I mean, everybody makes mistakes. Everybody on here knows they've made a mistake somewhere. And if we had busted you for it, you'd probably be doing some time. How easy would it be for you to jump through the hoops of life? So keep that in mind. This is somebody's daughter. This is somebody's son. This is somebody's mother, grandmother. We want to assist. If we're seeing them as victims, we really got to look at them as victims. So I just thank all of you. There's some awesome people out here doing the work, even on the prosecution side. And I am so appreciative. There's some prosecutors I work with that are just dynamite. So you're not the bad guy. You're doing your job. It's understandable. And Jill, I'm going to say this. As a last resort, Jill actually saved my life. So I'm not totally against incarcerating an individual, but I am like, if we've used all the other things, you know what I mean? Let's try other things.
Yeah.
But thank you very much for having me.
Joy. You're amazing,
Thank
Joy.
you.
Jeri?
Thank you so much for, spending time today together. I was really excited about this. And, I put up here a link to thelifestory.org, which was a project that myself and 12 other survivors were involved with. And it, feeds into this project that we're working on. And if you haven't checked it out, make sure you have enough time to spend a couple of hours and just go in and just, learn, because that's what it's all about. And you know what? We need to lead whatever work we have with, just like Joy said, with empathy, and that's strength-based, and seeing people for who they are instead of, what's wrong with them. I also really want to encourage you guys to follow Innovations HTC on Facebook and Instagram. And also we have another page, which is Human Trafficking in Indian Country, that we put a lot of our tribal related things on. And I really hope that that we're invited back and we could do a deeper dig into things. I also put into the chat something that was made by the Office of Trafficking in Persons. And it is Toolkit for Building Survivor-Informed Organizations. And so I strongly recommend that you take a look at that. And I just want to say thank you. And in Native culture, we raise our hands, in gratitude. So I want to raise my hands in gratitude to you all. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. You two are wonderful. It's been a pleasure. These are the 3 inaugural webinars, but we're going to be working so much more to push out more amazing survivor-led content you can always reach out to AEquitas. Thank you everyone for your participation today. Take care.